I never thought my life would turn out this way. If you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have told you that I was one of the lucky ones. The man who found his soulmate, built a beautiful life, and had a family to come home to every night. I had a wife I adored, a stable job, and a home filled with laughter, or so I thought. My name is Daniel, and I'm 36 years old. I run a successful contracting business, and while I'm not rich, I've done well enough to give my wife, Emily, a comfortable life. She's 33, stunning in every way, with long chestnut hair and bright green eyes that could disarm anyone. But it wasn't just her looks that captivated me. It was her kindness, her laughter, the way she made every room feel warmer just by being in it. We met when I was 27, fresh off a few failed relationships and ready to give up on love. She walked into my life when I least expected it, and from that moment, I was hooked. We married 3 years later, and for the past 6 years, I believe we had a rock-solid marriage. We had inside jokes, lazy Sunday mornings in bed, and date nights that made us feel like we were still those young kids who couldn't keep their hands off each other. Emily worked in event planning, always busy, always on the move. She was ambitious, social, and had a way of making people love her effortlessly. I, on the other hand, was more grounded, an early riser who preferred a quiet night at home to a loud party. We balanced each other out. At least, I thought we did. Then there was my brother, Eric. He's 2 years younger than me, and if you put us side by side, you wouldn't even guess we were related. Where I was always the responsible one, Eric was the wild card. He was charming in a way that got him out of trouble, the kind of guy who could make friends anywhere he went. He worked in finance, lived a flashy lifestyle, and never seemed to take life too seriously. He had a long history of dating models, influencers, and women who didn't last longer than a few months. I loved him, but I never truly trusted him. And yet, I never imagined I would one day learn the ultimate betrayal, the woman I devoted my life to, carrying my own brother's child. But that's still months away. For now, I still believe in the lie. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. They weren't big, glaring red flags, nothing obvious, nothing that would make me stop and question my marriage. Instead, they were small, subtle shifts, little moments that felt off but could be brushed aside with a reasonable excuse. And that's exactly what I did. Emily and I had always been affectionate, the type of couple that still held hands after years of marriage. But sometime in the past year, that changed. It wasn't abrupt. It was a slow withdrawal, like a tide receding so gradually you don't notice the shore disappearing. At first, I figured she was just stressed. Her job had become more demanding, with late-night meetings, weekend events, and an ever-growing list of high-profile clients. She would come home exhausted, flop onto the couch, and barely react when I kissed her cheek. When I asked if something was wrong, she would shake her head with a tired smile and say, "Just work, babe." It's been crazy. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Then there were the phone calls. Emily had never been glued to her phone, but now it was always in her hand, always buzzing with notifications. When I'd ask who she was texting, she would say it was a colleague, a client, or one of her girlfriends. And yet, she never let me see the screen. If I got too close, she would angle it away or lock it before I could glance at the conversation. One night, while we were in bed, her phone lit up. It was past midnight, and she was asleep, or at least pretending to be. I squinted at the screen. A message preview flashed before it disappeared. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wish I was in your bed right now." My stomach clenched. I reached for her phone, my pulse hammering, but before I could unlock it, she stirred. "What are you doing?" she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the device. "Your phone lit up. Someone sent a message." She blinked, then reached for the phone with practiced ease, tilting it away as she checked. A second later, she exhaled and gave me a sleepy smile. "It's just Ashley. She's drunk and being stupid. Go back to sleep, babe." I nodded slowly, forcing a chuckle. Of course. Ashley, her best friend, who always texted nonsense when she'd had too much wine. It made sense. But something didn't sit right. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice other things. She was dressing up more. New clothes, new lingerie, even perfume I had never smelled before. When I complimented her, She would smile and thank me, but there was a distance in her eyes, like her mind was somewhere else. And then there was Eric. My brother had always been a fixture in our lives. He and Emily got along well, sometimes too well. They had the kind of playful banter that I assumed was harmless, a brother-in-law and sister-in-law joking around. But I started to pick up on things I had never noticed before. The way his hand would linger a little too long on her shoulder when he hugged her. The way she laughed just a little too hard at his jokes. One evening, we had dinner together at a nice restaurant. Emily was glowing, laughing, more engaged than she had been in months. And Eric? He looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in the world. For the first time, a whisper of doubt crept into my mind. I ignored it, because Emily was my wife, and Eric was my brother. Because betrayal like that only happened in stories, in movies, not in real life. Not to me. They say when a marriage starts falling apart, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in inches, in late-night silences, in unanswered texts, in forced smiles that don't quite reach the eyes. That's exactly how it felt with Emily. She was still my wife. We still lived under the same roof, slept in the same bed, went through the motions of married life. But something was missing. The warmth, the connection, the feeling that I was the man she wanted. At first, I tried to ignore it. I made excuses. Her job was stressful, she was tired. Maybe it was just a rough patch. Every couple had them, right? But the more I reached for her, the further she seemed to slip away. Our sex life, once passionate and effortless, had become almost non-existent. When I initiated, she would give me soft, apologetic smiles and say she was too exhausted. "Rain check, babe," she would murmur, kissing my cheek before rolling over in bed. I told myself it was just a phase. But a part of me, a dark, nagging part, began to wonder if she had simply lost interest in me. And then there was Eric. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice something that made my skin crawl. Emily and my brother had always been friendly, but now it felt different. Whenever we were together, she seemed more alive around him, laughing at his jokes, teasing him in ways that felt too familiar, too intimate. And Eric? He looked at her in a way that made my stomach turn. One night, we were all at my parents' house for dinner. Nothing special, just a family gathering. I was sitting across from Emily and Eric, watching the way they interacted. She leaned into him when she spoke, playfully nudged his arm, smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in months. Then, at one point, she excused herself to use the bathroom. As soon as she was gone, Eric's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, smirked, and typed out a quick reply. I don't know what made me do it, but I casually stretched my neck to get a glimpse of his screen. Just 2 words. "Miss you." My throat went dry. I forced myself to sit there, my face calm, my hands steady. But inside, something cracked. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading into it too much. But the sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. That night, as Emily and I drove home, I tested the waters. "You and Eric have been talking a lot lately," I said casually, keeping my eyes on the road. She hesitated for just a second, just long enough for me to notice. "Yeah, I guess. He's been going through some stuff." "What kind of stuff?" She shrugged. "Just work stress. Relationship problems. You know how he is." I nodded slowly. "And you guys text a lot?" "Sometimes." "Why?" Her tone had a slight edge to it now, like she was already on the defensive. I forced a chuckle. "No reason. Just noticed, that's all." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're not jealous, are you?" I laughed. "Jealous? Of my own brother?" I shook my head and changed the subject. But deep down, something inside me was screaming. I just wasn't ready to listen. Looking back, I wish I had confronted it sooner. I wish I had ripped the truth out of the shadows instead of letting it fester in the dark corners of my mind. But when you love someone, when you trust them, you don't want to believe they could be capable of hurting you like that. I held on to that belief for as long as I could, until I couldn't anymore. It started with the late nights. Emily had always had a demanding job, but now she was constantly working late. Client meetings, she would say, event prep, last-minute changes. It became routine, her coming home past midnight, slipping into bed without a word. At first, I accepted it. I told myself she was just busy. But then I started noticing other things. She was dressing up more than usual. I'm talking about tight dresses, high heels, lingerie I had never seen before. And the perfume. Sweet, seductive, and completely unfamiliar. She didn't wear that for me. And then there were the showers. Every night when she came home late, she would go straight to the bathroom. I would hear the water running for nearly an hour before she finally crawled into bed beside me. When I tried to touch her, she would pull away, mumbling about how tired she was. One night, I tested her. She had just gotten out of the shower, her wet hair wrapped in a towel, when I pulled her into my arms and pressed my lips to her neck. "You smell different," I murmured against her skin. She stiffened for half a second before forcing a chuckle. "I just switched shampoos." She smelled too clean, like she was washing something away. That was when I knew. But knowing and proving it were two different things. So I started paying attention, watching her, tracking the inconsistencies. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband who accused his wife of something without evidence. I needed proof. One night, she told me she had a work event that would run late. I pretended to believe her, kissed her goodbye, and waited for her to leave. Then I grabbed my keys and followed her. She didn't go to work. She went to Eric's apartment. I sat in my car across the street, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I watched as she parked, checked her phone, and walked inside. She didn't even hesitate. She knew exactly where she was going. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, waiting for some part of me to wake up and realize this was a nightmare. That I wasn't actually witnessing my wife sneaking into my brother's home like a lover slipping into the arms of her man. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. And it got worse. 3 weeks later, Emily sat me down in the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for mine. Her eyes were bright, almost teary, but her lips curled into a soft, secretive smile. "Daniel," she whispered, "I'm pregnant." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Pregnant. My wife, who had been pulling away from me for months, who barely let me touch her, who had been sneaking into my brother's apartment. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Are you sure?" She nodded eagerly, squeezing my hands. "I took 2 tests, both positive. Can you believe it?" I forced a smile. I played my role. Because now, I wasn't just a betrayed husband. I was a man with a mission. I was going to find out the truth. And when I did, I was going to burn everything to the ground. Pregnant. The word echoed in my head like a curse, wrapping around me like chains I couldn't break. Emily was glowing, her hands trembling in excitement as she waited for my reaction. She had no idea I already knew. No idea that the moment she walked into Eric's apartment 3 weeks ago, she had destroyed everything. So I did what any man in my position would do. I smiled. I played my part. I pulled her into my arms, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "This is amazing." And then I set my plan in motion. The following weeks were unbearable. Emily acted like nothing had changed, but to me, everything had. She would place my hand on her stomach and say things like, "Our baby, Daniel. Can you believe it?" I could barely look at her without feeling sick. At night, when she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every lie. Every time she came home late smelling like him. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that would shatter whatever pathetic excuse she might try to come up with. So I went to the only person who could give me that. My brother. Eric lived in a sleek bachelor pad, all glass and modern furniture, cold and impersonal, just like him. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his grin faltered. "Good. Be nervous, you piece of shit. Daniel, what's up, man?" He leaned against the doorframe, casual, but his eyes flicked behind me, like he was worried Emily might be in the car. I forced a smile. "I wanted to talk. Can I come in?" He hesitated. Then, with a short nod, he stepped aside. The moment I was inside, I took a deep breath, keeping my rage in check. Emily's pregnant. Eric went still. I watched him carefully, looking for a crack, a flicker of something. Guilt, panic, anything. But he was good. Too good. His face barely changed, just a slight twitch in his jaw. That's great, man," he said slowly. "Congrats." I didn't blink. Yeah, it is. A heavy silence stretched between us. Then I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. You think the baby looks like me? His eyes widened. Just for a second. Just long enough. I didn't need to say anything else. I turned and walked out. That night, I lay beside my wife, my mind racing. I had the truth. I knew, but I needed proof. I needed to make sure that when I confronted her, there would be no escape. No way for her to twist her lies into something believable. So I did what I never thought I'd have to do. I made an appointment for a DNA test. Emily thought we were going in for a routine checkup. She smiled at me in the waiting room, her fingers laced through mine, oblivious to the fact that the walls were closing in around her. I smiled back, because soon, everything she had built with my brother was going to come crashing down, and I would be the one to light the match. The morning of the test, Emily was in high spirits. She hummed as she got dressed, glowing with excitement. To her, this was just another step in our journey to parenthood. To me, it was the moment I would finally confirm what I already knew. As we drove to the clinic, she squeezed my hand. I'm so happy, Daniel. I know things have been a little off between us lately, but this baby is going to bring us closer. I forced a smile. Yeah, closer. If only she knew. The test itself was simple. A quick cheek swab for me, a routine blood draw for her. The nurse was cheerful, asking us the usual questions, treating us like just another expectant couple. Emily answered every question with enthusiasm, while I played my part, nodding and smiling. But inside, I was counting down the hours. The results would take a week. 7 days of pretending. 7 days of keeping my rage buried beneath a mask of devotion. 7 days before I burned my marriage to the ground. I spent that week gathering everything I needed. Bank statements, shared assets, text logs, any piece of evidence that would help me rip her out of my life with surgical precision. I met with my lawyer in secret, making sure that when the time came, I would walk away with everything, and she and Eric would be left with nothing. The hardest part was keeping up the act. Emily was more affectionate than she had been in months. She curled up next to me on the couch, rested her head on my chest, talked about baby names and nursery colors. I let her believe she still had me. Because when those results came in, she was going to realize she had already lost me. The phone call came on a Friday afternoon. I was at work when the clinic called, and I stepped outside, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers went numb. Mr. Calloway, the nurse said, we have your results. I swallowed hard. And a pause. Then, in a voice filled with careful sympathy, you are not the father. The world around me blurred. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Not the father. Not the father. The words echoed in my head, sealing my fate. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. I had known. But hearing it out loud, having the undeniable proof, was something else entirely. It was over. But before I walked away, I was going to make sure they paid for what they did to me. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. I sat in my truck for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The rage inside me felt like a living thing, clawing at my ribs, demanding to be unleashed. Emily had lied to my face, over and over again. She had looked me in the eye, placed my hand on her stomach, and called this our baby. And Eric, my own brother. I wasn't just betrayed. I was mocked. But I wasn't going to explode in blind fury. No, that would be too easy for them. They would cry, they would apologize, and then they would try to spin their lies into something that softened their guilt. I wasn't going to let that happen. I was going to make sure they felt every ounce of the pain they had put me through. I went home that evening as if nothing had happened. Emily greeted me with a warm smile, her eyes filled with excitement. She thought today was just another normal day. She had no idea it was the beginning of the end. How was work? She asked, wrapping her arms around my waist. I kissed the top of her head. Good. Just tired. Come sit down, she said, leading me to the couch. I was looking at some nursery ideas. Want to see? I sat beside her, watching as she scrolled through pictures on her phone. Soft blues, pastel yellows, a crib that she had already bookmarked. She was building a life with his child. My stomach twisted, but I kept my expression neutral. This all looks great, I said. You should show Eric. He's good with this kind of stuff. She stiffened, just for a second. Barely noticeable, but I caught it. Then she forced a laugh. Why would I show Eric? I smiled. I don't know. You guys have been spending so much time together lately. Her fingers tightened around her phone. He's family. Of course we spend time together. I nodded slowly. Right. Family. I let the silence stretch between us, let her squirm under the weight of my words. I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way she was suddenly hyper-aware of every breath she took. She knew. She knew. She just didn't know how much I knew. Not yet. The next morning, I texted Eric. Me, come by the house later. I need to talk to you about something important. It took him 5 minutes to respond. Eric, everything okay? Me, yeah. Just some big news. You should hear it in person. He didn't ask any more questions. He just said he'd be over at 6. Perfect. I called out of work and spent the entire day preparing. I gathered the DNA test results, the bank statements, the legal documents I had been quietly putting together. I made sure everything was lined up so that when I dropped the bomb, there would be no escape. And when 6 o'clock rolled around, I sat in the living room, waiting to finally destroy the people who had destroyed me. At exactly 6 p.m., Eric knocked on the door. Emily was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. She had no idea what was coming. I opened the door and let him in, keeping my face neutral. He walked in casually, flashing his usual cocky grin. "What's up, man?" he said, clapping me on the shoulder. I gestured toward the couch. "Have a seat." Emily came into the living room, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Oh, hey, Eric," she chirped, giving him a bright smile. I noticed the way she looked at him, the slight flicker of excitement, the glint in her eyes. It made me sick. I took a deep breath and pulled the envelope from my pocket. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the DNA test for the baby." The room went silent. Emily's smile froze, her fingers tightening around the towel. Eric's face lost its color. Why would you get a DNA test?" Emily stammered, trying to laugh. "That's ridiculous." I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just opened the envelope, pulled out the paper, and read it out loud. Probability of paternity, 0%. I looked up. Emily was pale. Eric swallowed hard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The truth had finally been laid bare, and there was no way to spin it, no way to talk their way out of it. Emily's lips parted, her eyes darting to Eric, then back to me. "Daniel, I held up a hand. Don't you dare insult me by pretending to be confused." "I know." Her bottom lip trembled. "Please, I turned to Eric. "How long?" He blinked. "What? How long have you been screwing my wife?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "How long have you been betraying me?" Eric hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "Daniel, look, man. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I laughed coldly. "Oh? And how exactly was it supposed to happen? You were just having fun until she got knocked up?" Emily started sobbing. "It was a mistake. I never meant to hurt you, I swear." I stared at her, disgust curling in my gut. "A mistake?" I shook my head. "A mistake is forgetting to turn off the stove. A mistake is running a red light. You made a choice, Emily, over and over again, and now you get to live with the consequences." I turned back to Eric. "As for you, you're not my brother anymore." He looked away, shame finally creeping into his face. I took a deep breath and walked to the kitchen table, where I had stacked a pile of documents. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "Emily, I've already spoken to my lawyer. The divorce papers are ready to be filed. You'll be hearing from them soon." Her eyes widened in horror. "Daniel, please." I ignored her. I turned to Eric. "And you? You owe me money." His brows furrowed. "What?" I smirked and tossed a folder onto the table. "Remember that business loan I gave you 2 years ago? I want every cent back. Now." He opened the folder, his face paling as he scanned the documents. "Daniel, I don't have this kind of money right now." "Then figure it out." Emily sobbed harder. "You can't just leave me. I'm carrying a child." I scoffed. Yeah, his child. Not mine. That's your problem, not mine. Then I walked to the door, grabbed my coat, and turned back to them one last time. I hope you two are so happy together, I said, my voice dripping with venom. Because after tonight, I never want to see either of you again. And with that, I walked out. Out of my house. Out of my marriage. Out of the life I had built with a woman who had never truly been mine. I didn't look back. As I walked out of that house, my house, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. But I wasn't done yet. Emily and Eric thought they could betray me and walk away with their lives intact. They thought I would crumble, that I would break. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, I met with my lawyer to finalize everything. I made sure Emily got nothing from me. Because of the prenup, she had no claim to my house, my savings, or my business. Everything she had was because of me, and now, I was taking it all back. You want to serve the divorce papers today? My lawyer asked, already knowing the answer. I smiled. Absolutely. The papers were delivered to Emily by noon. She called me 27 times. I didn't answer. I was done with her. Then came Eric. He owed me money, and I wasn't about to let him slither out of it. I had a contract, legal proof of the loan I had given him for his failed business venture. He had no choice but to pay me back, and if he didn't, I would take him to court. By the afternoon, I had frozen the joint accounts I once shared with Emily, reclaimed everything in my name, and set the wheels in motion for my departure. Because I wasn't just cutting them off. I was leaving. For good. That evening, Emily showed up at my parents' house, pounding on the door like a madwoman. My mother, bless her heart, let her in before I could stop her. Daniel, please, she sobbed, mascara streaking down her face. Don't do this. We can fix this. I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe. Fix what, Emily? The fact that you cheated on me? The fact that you're carrying my brother's child? She shook her head desperately. I made a mistake. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed coldly. You didn't mean to sleep with my brother? You didn't mean to get pregnant by him? She reached for my hand. I pulled away. I love you, Daniel, she whispered. I stared at her, at the pathetic mess of a woman in front of me, and realized something. I felt nothing for her anymore. Not love, not hate, not sadness, just indifference. That's too bad, I said, because I don't love you anymore. She broke down completely, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked past her, grabbed my keys, and left the house. There was nothing left for me there. That night, I booked my flight. In 3 days, I would be gone, far away from the wreckage of my old life. A fresh start, a new beginning. And Emily and Eric, they could have each other, because I was finally free. 3 days later, I boarded a plane with nothing but a suitcase and a one-way ticket. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my parents, not my friends. I needed a clean break. A fresh start in a place where no one knew me as the man whose wife cheated on him with his own brother. As the plane took off, I stared out the window, watching the city that had once been my home shrink beneath me. I expected to feel sadness, regret, something, but all I felt was relief. The first few weeks were a blur. I settled into my new apartment, started a new job, built a routine. I kept to myself at first, focusing on regaining the parts of me I had lost. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. No more late night wondering where Emily was. No more pretending everything was fine. No more pain. One night, a few months after I left, I got a text from an unknown number. Emily, I miss you. Please talk to me. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it, blocked the number, and never thought about her again. Months turned into a year. I made friends. I traveled. I worked hard. And one day, without even realizing it, I stopped thinking about the past altogether, because that's all it was now. The past. And I had a whole future ahead of me. One where I was no longer a victim. One where I was free.